From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. First up today, K-State's Doohong Min and Barry Bradford will outline their new project, which will evaluate low-lignin alfalfa varieties for their production potential here in the Central Plains and for their improved digestibility in dairy herd rations. Then Washburn University's Roger McEowen is back to discuss the conclusion of a 30-year court battle between a farm couple and the USDA over a swampbuster declaration on the farm property. Just a few days back, an appellate court ruled in favor of the farm couple, in the process lambasting the USDA for its handling of the situation. And further ahead with Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network, and we're glad to have you aboard once more. As you beef and dairy producers are well aware, one of the leading forages grown in this state is alfalfa. It's been a staple of cattle feedstuffs for a long, long while now. A new project, which will be launched here at Kansas State University in collaboration with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, will take a look at a new alfalfa type, which might be a great improvement over the standard types as this may play out. Joining us, Doohong Min. He's a forage agronomist in the K-State Department of Agronomy. Barry Bradford is a bovine nutritionist in the Animal Sciences and Industry Department, both at Kansas State University. They're two of the three researchers involved in this work at K-State. So what we're talking about, Doohong, is low-lignin alfalfa, and you might explain what that is.
Yeah, low-lignin alfalfa, basically, lignin is a very important component in fibers in plant because it helps the plant to be upright, right? Without lignin, plant is going to lodge very easily. But at the same time, the lignin is also kind of enemy for digestibility, which result in low milk and meat production. So in the past 10 years, two major companies developed this kind of a low lignin alfalfa working with the USDA and Noble Foundation as well, and they developed this low-lignin alfalfa, which has a lower lignin content compared to conventional alfalfa varieties on the market. So this can be kind of a turning point, especially for the highly performing dairy cows.
When you say a lower lignin alfalfa, a significantly lower percentage of lignin?
Yes, they're talking about minimum 5 to 12% lower than the conventional alfalfa varieties.
And for your part, Barry, you'll be looking at the feeding trials within this. But this is an issue in terms of digestibility, as Doohong says, for cattle.
Yeah, what's interesting about the modern dairy cow is her genetic ability to make milk is so extremely high that literally the primary issue we have is getting enough calories through her. And if we have her rumen completely full of slowly degrading fiber, she just isn't hungry as quick. She doesn't eat as much. We can't get the calories in, and she doesn't produce as much milk. So one of the solutions to that everyone has been working on across forage types in the last 20 years or so is how do we feed that fiber that she needs for the health of her digestive system while making it more rapidly digested so that she can, again, eat more and get those calories into her.
And this could well be that solution, which you're going to be looking at by way of a $500,000 grant from the USDA. You'll be starting this fall, Doohong, we understand. Let's talk about how you'll approach this from the agronomic side.
Yeah, because planting alfalfa is the most basic but the most important component of this trial. In other words, if we fail to establish good standards of alfalfa, then we cannot do feeding trials. So we'll do our best to establish good standards of alfalfa in next 2 to 3 weeks at the North Farm. And also, as I mentioned, that we're going to work with their nutritionist at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So he's going to do a feeding trial. To do that, he's going to plant about 25 acres of large acres of alfalfa consisting of 2 different varieties, the low-lignin and also the conventional variety.
Is much known about the productivity of low-lignin alfalfa in our conditions here then?
No. Actually, I had 2 PhD students. One was working on the monoculture of low-lignin alfalfa comparing with the conventional alfalfa, and another student worked on the low-lignin alfalfa with the grass mixtures. So in terms of publications in the U.S., so far only 2 scientifically papers published in the past 2 years.
So really this study
this is very, very new study.
This is trying to fill those gaps of information.
Exactly. Especially the water use of this low-lignin alfalfa is not known at all. So we're going to compare this low-lignin alfalfa compared to a conventional variety in terms of water use efficiency.
And we might mention how you'll go about that aspect of this research. Your colleague Krishna Jagadish from agronomy will be using those unique rain shelters.
Rain-out shelters.
Right.
Yeah, rain-out shelter trial in this study, it might be very, very unique compared to any other alfalfa research. As I understand it, no one has done this type of a research on alfalfa using rain-out shelters in the nation.
For those who don't know, those shelters allow for precise water levels to any given crop, fully sheltered and regulated with basically a hoop structure.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's going to make this an intriguing approach. And once you've grown the alfalfa, then Barry comes in along with colleague at Nebraska for their trials to just see how that alfalfa performs, Barry?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we know that lignin slows degradation of fiber, but the magnitude of that effect really differs across crops. And so when we make assumptions about the digestibility of these different alfalfa sources, we're really extrapolating from what we know from other crops, and it could be wrong. It could be greater magnitude effect, it could be lesser. And I mean, some of the work we're doing is not that complicated. We're essentially looking at digestibility of these feeds and then how much milk these cows produce. But that's really the critical information for a dairy producer, particularly when it comes to valuing the crop. So it's going to cost a little bit more for a hay grower to produce the low-lignin alfalfa. Perhaps you give up some yield. I'm not sure. It's certainly the seed is going to cost a little more. Is it justified for a dairy producer then to pay more for that hay, which was more expensive to grow? And we're hoping to provide some of the information to inform those decisions.
Because like on the agronomic side, very little is known about the performance in the rumen.
Exactly. There's been a couple small studies done in ruminants, but never in dairy cattle, and they are kind of unique in terms of the passage rate through the gut, the speed at which feed flows through a dairy cow, and so the impact of different chemistries can be different in the dairy cow.
Doohong, as you go into this, do you have any preconceived notions on the potential yield of these alfalfa types?
Yeah, actually, based on the my PhD students' research in the past 4 years, the yield of low-lignin alfalfa was compatible or even a little bit higher than the conventional alfalfa varieties. Yeah, we thought that this low-lignin alfalfa is going to have a little bit lower yield due to some lodging issues, but we couldn't find any lodging issues. But a good thing about this low-lignin alfalfa is that once the alfalfa starts to blossom, then the nutritive value of alfalfa starts to decline dramatically. But this low-lignin alfalfa variety has or can maintain the nutritive value after even blossoming, while also increasing the biomass. So when farmers have some rain forecast in next 2 to 3 days, but he see already the blossoming today, then he has to wait at least 4-5 more days until the soil dries up, right? But this low-lignin alfalfa doesn't decline in terms of nutritive value. So farmers can maintain nutritive value while increasing also the biomass.
Lest we forget, timing of harvest is everything.
So it gives more flexibility to alfalfa producers.
And as far as that lodging concern?
Yeah, based on our trial here in Kansas, we didn't see any lodging issues.
So all is shaping up well, but you have to test it in the field, and that's what you'll be doing, planting here in the next couple of weeks?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, we're going to plant both in the field and also on the rain-out shelters.
Right. And your expectations here, Barry, are fairly high, one would imagine, given all of these basics that we know about low-lignin alfalfas to date.
Sure. Yeah, we plan to feed a relatively alfalfa-heavy diet to these dairy cows. And again, we think many times dairy cows are limited in their ability to produce milk by how much feed they can consume. And so we presume they'll be able to consume more feed and produce more milk in turn.
And at some point, maybe look at this from the beef vantage point later on down the line?
Yeah, perhaps. There's big differences in the rate of feed intake for, say, a mature beef cow versus a mature dairy cow, and that changes the digestibility dynamics. But in, say, a rapidly growing, developing, recently weaned calf, for example, if they're still feeding a relatively high forage diet, because of their rate of gain, they would have a higher intake relative to body weight and be more similar to a dairy cow. So there'd be some relevant applications, I think.
Well, you're both clearly excited about this project and what it may render in the way of good information. And for how long will you do this, 2 or 3 seasons?
Yeah, actually, we're going to plan this fall and then at least 2 years, but we are planning to extend 1 more year. So basically, this is a 3-year project.
Once again, in collaboration with colleagues and peers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Well, it's an interesting option, and we'll be eagerly awaiting to see the results of low-lignin alfalfa, performance in field, performance in the dairy ration, and we'll have you back for an update on those findings as they come forth, if we might.
Thank you.
Great,
Gentlemen, thank you for coming over.
Thank you.
Doohong Min, forage agronomist at K-State. Barry Bradford is an animal scientist specializing in bovine nutrition here at the university. Again, they will launch this project on the strength of a $500,000 grant from the USDA that will test the performance in field of low-lignin alfalfa and, again, the feeding performance likewise in the dairy herd ration. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and glad to have you back. Now we visit once more with a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen. Roger has just put an article this past week up on his blog that tells about a long, drawn-out court case over the USDA's swampbuster rules, a decision on which was rendered earlier this month. And this is quite a winding road as far as this case goes, Roger, but let's begin with outlining the swampbuster provisions which were passed well over 3 decades ago.
That's right, Eric. They came in as part of the 1985 Farm Bill, those conservation cross-compliance provisions. That's where the concept of swampbuster came from. Basically, the legislation at that time charged the Soil Conservation Service with creating an official wetland inventory with a particular tract being classified as a wetland if it had 3 things. You had to have presence of hydric soil, wetland hydrology, that means soil inundation for at least 7 days or saturated for at least 14 days during the growing season. And third, you had to have the prevalence of what's called hydrophytic plants under undisturbed conditions. So, in other words, under the swampbuster rules, as written in the 1985 Farm Bill, to be a wetland, a tract had to have hydric soils, hydrophytic vegetation, and wetland hydrology. And you had to have all 3 of those. Just 1 of those or 2 of those were not enough. You had to have all 3. And of course, Eric, the whole point of swampbuster was if you had a wetland that met that definition, you couldn't then drain it and plant a crop on it and be eligible to receive federal farm program benefits.
Well, that with the backdrop, let's get right to this case at hand, which originated not long after the inception of swampbuster. There were a litany of actions by the USDA regarding this farming couple and their use of a particular parcel of land. What were the details?
Well, that's right. This, and again, for people listening, they need to keep in mind that this litigation actually started in the late 1980s. So this has gone on over 30 years until we just recently got the Federal Court of Appeals decision out of the Seventh Circuit. So you've got farmers in southern Indiana. They're farming land that had been continuously used for livestock or grain production for over 150 years. And the tenant on the land participated in farm programs. Mm-hmm. Long story short, in 87, they get notified by the USDA, NRCS, that their farm might contain wetlands due to the presence of hydric soils. In 89, there was a national wetland inventory that was taken, and it failed to identify any wetland on that farm. But in 1991, the USDA came out to the farm. They made what's known as a non-certified determination of potential wetlands and prior converted wetlands and converted wetlands. Then you fast forward another 3 years, still nothing happened from that. Everything was silent from the government. In 94, the plaintiff's husband, who has now subsequently died, he noticed that passerbys at that time in 94 were dumping garbage on a portion of the property. And so to deter that, he cleaned up the garbage, cleared the brush, removed 5 trees initially, 4 more several years later. Those were upland-type trees that were unlikely to be found in wetland. And the tree removal impacted a small fraction of 1 acre, very, very small area. But the USDA then notified them at that time that the tree removal might have triggered a wetland or a swampbuster violation, and that the land had been impermissibly drained by field tile, which it had not. There was never any field tile on this property, but that was the allegation at that point in time. So because the land was farmed, the NRCS used an off-site comparison field to compare with this tract for a determination of the presence of a wetland. And that comparison site, and here's the problem, USDA chose a comparison site that was an unfarmed depression that was unquestionably a wetland, and used that as the comparison site, and lo and behold, the landowner's tract turns out to be a wetland. They go through the administrative process, which you have to do. You can't go straight to court as a farmer. And they went all the way through that. They lost. They go to the National Appeals Division in D.C. They lose that, and then they can finally jump into the court judicial system. So they get to the Federal District Court for the Southern District of Indiana.
And, of course, this couple was challenging, well, the methodology here of that wetlands determination and all those processes that you just described. So how did the trial court rule initially on this?
Well, they said 5 things. They said the removal of the trees and the vegetation had the effect of making possible the production of an ag commodity where the trees once stood. Now, keep in mind, this is a tiny, tiny fraction of an acre. Secondly, the trial court said that the NRCS followed regulatory procedures for determining wetland status on the land that was being farmed by comparing the land to comparable tracts that were not being farmed. But keep in mind, the comparable tract that wasn't being farmed was not farm ground, it was not pasture, it was a depression that was unquestionably a wet hole is what it was. Third, the court said the existing regs did not require site visits during the growing season, and what happened was, in this case, the site visits occurred in the winter after a foot of snow had melted by 4 inches of rain. That's when the government came out and looked at it and said, oh, lo and behold, yeah, you do have a wetland. Fourth, the court said normal circumstances of the land does not refer to normal climate conditions, but instead refers to soil and hydrologic conditions normally present without regard to the removal of vegetation. That's a key point. And then finally, the court said, well, the 10-year time frame between the preliminary determination by USDA and NRCS and the final determination, even though you let 10 years go by government, that didn't deprive the landowners of their due process rights.
Wow.
So it was a bad decision for the landowners from the trial court.
But the appellate court, just a little over a week ago, and this is fair to put it this way, brought the hammer to the USDA on its handling of this circumstance.
You're right. This opinion by the Court of Appeals, and I'll quote a sentence that is very pertinent to this has to be an absolute embarrassment to the USDA. Because the court looked at this and said, no, your comparison sites are wrong. You're comparing apples and oranges. Secondly, you did your site visits when you knew you would absolutely find a wetland because there was a foot of snow that had melted with 4 inches of rain. So everything's flooded at that point in time. You didn't send a hydrologist out to personally examine their property. You claimed instead that a comparison site wasn't even necessary and that the one that you used was appropriate. And they said you're wrong on both of those points according to the existing regulations. And your understanding of the statute, the court said, is far too narrow, and it went against all other applicable regulatory and statutory provisions by completely foregoing the basis of hydrology that the provisions are grounded in. And then the court said this, and I'll quote this. This is a quote. Rather than grappling with this evidence, the hearing officer, that means the USDA hearing officer, used transparently circular logic, asserting that the agency experts had appropriately found hydric soils, hydrophytic vegetation, and wetland hydrology, end quote. That's a big ouch to the agency. The court was not pleased at all with the procedures the agency followed. And the court also said that plaintiff's, the surviving widow in this instance, not only is entitled to an entry of judgment in her favor, but the court said she is to be awarded, quote, all appropriate relief, end quote. That on the remand could mean attorney's fees because of the government's conduct.
And because of the duration of this case, and a lot was invested in it clearly by the plaintiffs. So it really does point to how bureaucratic processes can get out of hand, Roger.
It does. I know personally that a lot of farmers are reluctant to hire legal counsel. They're afraid of the cost. They think that, you know, my friends are on the local county committee. We'll work things out. We'll get a deal done. Common sense will prevail, and it'll all work out. Well, that may be the case at the county level. Those may be fellow producers that are on the county level committee with USDA and RCS, and that's fine. But that's not the final determination in the regulatory appeal process, in that administrative process. You got to go on to the state, and then you got to go on to, if you're not pleased with that result, you're going to end up in D.C. I can guarantee you at that point in time, you're not dealing with people that you know. You are dealing with professional bureaucrats. And the game is different. They have a different end game that they see than a county committee might. If you get a favorable decision at the county level, the government may appeal that, and they'll turn it around at the state or the federal level, at the USDA NAD. And then the NAD director historically upholds what the USDA NAD determines if it's negative for the producer. So what I'm saying is it's best to have legal counsel in tow from the beginning. It is worth your investment to do that. This was a case that drug on for over 30 years, and this is not the only case that I could cite that we've seen this with respect to swampbuster. I was involved in one in Nebraska that drug on for 25 years. Wow. And finally getting a resolution in the favor of the landowner in the Sandhills. But these are nightmarish type cases. Nobody wants to get their farm or part of their farm tied up in litigation and in a bureaucratic web for over 3 decades, let alone a year or two. That's bad enough. I wish we didn't have to deal with these types of things. I hope the future is better on these, but this is a case that really illustrates how bad things can get.
Right. And listeners, if you'd like to have a look at the entire saga of this case, why, Roger has put this up on his blog at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR, the court decision illustrating the USDA's swampbuster incompetence, as it is entitled. Roger, thanks for sharing all of this. We'll talk again very soon.
Thank you, Eric.
Roger McEowen. He's a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. He joins us every other Wednesday on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. One of the nation's largest ethanol companies announced yesterday that it will idle a 92 million gallon plant in Cloverdale, Indiana, following the EPA's decision to grant 31 new small refinery waivers to the renewable fuel standard for 2018. Poet, which is based in South Dakota, stated it had started the process of idling that Indiana plant due to recent decisions by the administration regarding the waivers. The company said in a news release that the move means the plant will cease processing of over 30 million bushels of corn annually, and hundreds of local jobs will be impacted, said the release. Poet said it already had cut production at half of its plants, with the largest cuts coming at plants in Iowa and Ohio. In addition, the company said numerous jobs will be consolidated across Poet's 28 plants, and corn processing will be reduced by an additional 100 million bushels across the states of Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Minnesota, South Dakota, and Missouri. Now, Poet Chairman and CEO Jeff Broin said in a statement that ethanol companies made investments based on the EPA's upholding of the renewable fuel standard. Since 2016, the Trump administration has issued 85 exemptions, totaling over 4 billion gallons of ethanol equivalent gallons not being blended with gasoline. Poet said the continued issuance of small refinery waivers are, quoting, wiping out any near-term ethanol market growth expected from the allowance of year-round E15. Now, this comes on the heels of a report earlier by Reuters that President Trump ordered cabinet members on Monday to stem the tide of rising anger in Iowa and other Farm Bill states, says that account, over the EPA granting of SREs. That report said that the president's order came after a 2-hour meeting at the White House on Monday that involved representatives from the USDA, EPA, and the Energy Department. Now, the EPA last week had announced that it had granted those 31 SREs of the 40 that had been submitted for the 2018 compliance year at that time, with 6 rejected and 3 either withdrawn or declared ineligible. Since then, the EPA data now shows that 2 more SRE requests are pending for the 18 compliance year. That brings the total requested now to 42. Vice President Mike Pence has warned China that it will be harder to strike a trade deal if it violates Hong Kong's laws amid the continued protests. Quoting the Vice President, for the United States to make a deal with China, Beijing needs to honor its commitments, beginning with the commitment China made in 1984 to respect the integrity of Hong Kong's laws through the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The Vice President shared that during a presentation at the Detroit Economic Club. He also called on Congress to quickly pass the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement after the recess. Pence noted that the passage of USMCA would also help bolster the administration's agenda with China. Quoting the Vice President, make no mistake about it, passing the USMCA will strengthen the president's hand in negotiations with China. The Sand County Foundation, in partnership with Ranchland Trust of Kansas and the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, has announced 4 finalists for the Kansas Leopold Conservation Award. Todd Domer talks about that award and some of the practices used by these leaders in the field of agricultural conservation.
Given in honor of renowned conservationist Aldo Leopold, the $10,000 award and Crystal Trophy recognizes those who inspire others with their voluntary dedication to land, water, and wildlife resources. Ted Alexander of Alexander Ranch at Sun City has successfully used a rotational grazing system for beef cattle. Native plant and wildlife diversity has been enhanced due to their conservation practices. The Alexanders also have done extensive clearing of eastern red cedar trees. Vance and Louise Emke of Healy are fourth-generation farmers using more than 50 playas for education and outreach on how the water sources contribute to the Ogallala Aquifer. They also have enrolled hundreds of acres in conservation programs for migratory birds and other wildlife habitat. Dwayne Roth owns Big D Farms near Holcomb, where cover crops are used to build soil health and combat wind erosion on sandy soils. He is one of the state's first water technology farmers. Roth tests new irrigation strategies that maintain crop production with reduced water usage. Keith and Eva Yearout manage the Z-Bar Ranch owned by Turner Enterprises. The ranch focuses on maximizing habitat for native species like the lesser prairie chicken. It produces enough grass to sustain a 1,200-head bison herd. Improvements on water infrastructure and grazing management have allowed range and soil health to return. The overall winner of the 2019 Kansas Leopold Award will be named during the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts Convention, November 24th through the 26th in Wichita. I'm Todd Domer.
And there are 2 more K-State crop field days yet this week we want to tell you about. One's coming up tomorrow, the 2019 Southwest Research and Extension Center Fall Field Day. That'll get starting at 8 o'clock in the morning with registration, the program just after 9 o'clock. Among the topics to be covered there, weed control in irrigated corn, performance tests of summer annual forages, maximizing irrigation efficiency, weed control in irrigated grain sorghum, and options for control of star rain-resistant kochia. After the lunch, the seminars will cover BT corn refuges, beneficial insects and how to keep them happy, herbicides and a wheat cover crop for kochia control in corn, and multiple herbicide-resistant kochia. Again, that's on the agenda for the 2019 Fall Field Day at K-State's Southwest Research and Extension Center, just to the east of Garden City. It'll get started at 8 o'clock in the morning with registration, that program just after 9 o'clock. And the Flickner Innovation Farm will host its first ever Field Day event on Friday, highlighting current work by local producers, industry members, and K-State researchers to conserve water while improving water quality and soil health. That program begins at 8:45, ends at 1:30 at different venues in the Mound Ridge area. The event is free. Lunch will be provided. More information, including registration, is available online at the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment, based here at K-State. So simply search for Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
The seedling orchards were big blocks with many trees.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Prunus persica, the peach, is not from Persia or Iran, but from northwest China. A few days ago, friends dropped some peaches off. It's the fruit of the gods. They were delicious and reminded me of my time working as a technician in fruit breeding at VPI, Blacksburg, Virginia. Fascinating work. I worked for Dr. George Oberly. He has been long gone. A great guy. Walking the long rows of seedlings to be tested, it was my job to pick the ripe peach which was representative of the crop on the tree. I would quickly halve it and twist it through halves. That would show if it was a cling or a freestone. I would quarter the half and offer it to Dr. George on the tip of my peeling knife. Then we would sum up its characteristics. If it was a stringy, sweet, blood red inside, juicy, or acid, and more, We would describe its outside blush and fuzziness. The seedling orchards were big blocks with many trees, and starting early, we would taste many peaches during the morning and afternoon, catching the crop of seedlings as they ripened. Earlier years we would have made the crosses as we did every year. The process of emasculating the peach blooms on the chosen trees and branches, for that we had allowed the nails of thumb and the first finger to grow. That made the perfect tool to the delicate job with dexterity. Later we would play the bee's role, apply pollen, and protect the developing flower with the growing peach. Peaches where a whole branch was involved. Like breeding livestock, you make an educated guess in selecting parentage, but you never know until you have the results. As the peaches ripened around the internal pit, you were anxious about hailstorms or any other calamity which would upset and ruin the work done. And then something totally unexpected could happen. One day, when a group of interested people were visiting, I took them on a tour and told them not to touch or take any fruit they were seeing hanging. I told them there would be fruit to taste on our return of the tour. Maybe I should have steered away from the block of seedlings, but I did not think about that, knowing they were interested as a group of master gardeners would be today. Anyway, as I was explaining the work that was being done with fruit breeding, peach breeding at hand, I saw an elderly lady pick a beautiful peach, the forbidden fruit. I thought about Adam and Eve. It was too late. I watched the juice run down her chin. She had bit into the fruit. But remember, it was not the flesh of that fruit I was after. It was the stone inside which held promise. Before the lady could toss the fruit, I stepped up and kindly said, "Glad you enjoyed this great peach. But please, may I have the stone now that you are done with it?" I accepted the messy stone, the pit, and wrapped it in my hanky. My wife would thank me for that, but that's all I had at that moment. I tried not to make her feel embarrassed. From an educational point of view, it was the perfect opportunity. Of course, at harvest time we collected and cleaned hundreds of stones or pits, and after cleaning and storage would plant them out as new seedling blocks to grow into trees which would bear fruit. And after a few years, when they would bear fruit, we would walk the rows and evaluate. It was an ongoing process, hoping that nature would reward our work. Over the years, the Presidential Peach Series was the result. Peaches with the names of Washington, Monroe, Jefferson, and Madison came out of the program, with the nectarines, Pocahontas, and others. The one pit I saved was placed with thousands of others. But in the back of your mind, you wonder, was that the one outstanding one for that year? I never knew. Statistically, I can tell you it probably was not. That's the way it goes in nature. Average rules. But today, whenever I cut a peach expertly, as I used to, I will automatically go through the evaluation steps. The same goes for apples. Oh, we had some good apples in the seedling orchards too. To finish the story about the peaches, you have to understand that if we had success and were awarded with an above-average peach, we would propagate the tree. For that, we bought pits from a canning company by the bagful, just pits. Those pits were seeded out in rows, and with one sturdy shoot, they were then used to craft with T-bud from the selected peach. When the bud had taken, it would grow into a tree, producing the selected peach. A lot of work was involved. You work with nature, with hope. But you know, nature can and does take over at times. Much what is said about peaches goes for apples too, except an apple core holds many seeds, each one different. Remember, the golden delicious apple was an act of nature, and if I remember right, grew up in a fence row of a pigsty in West Virginia. And that was a long time ago, but that tree then was fenced in, once recognized for what it was. But that is another story.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That'll do it for our Wednesday edition. As always, thanks for listening in, and please be back with us right here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.